Walk down a narrow, cobblestone street. Brick buildings from the 1700s tower on both sides. A church bell rings in the distance. Street musicians play classical music on the corner. You grab an espresso from a small cafe and watch people hurry past on foot, not in cars. Where are you? Paris? London? Amsterdam? No, you're in Boston, Massachusetts, and you've just discovered America's most European city. Today on Worldview TV, we're exploring how Boston became a slice of Europe planted on American soil. We're talking about the architecture that makes you feel like you've crossed the Atlantic, the walkable neighborhoods that reject car culture, the old world charm mixed with new world energy, and why this city feels fundamentally different from the rest of America. If you love history, culture, and cities that have real character, you're going to love this journey. Hit that subscribe button, because we're about to discover why Boston might just be the most interesting city in America. Let's explore. Let's start with the most obvious thing you notice when you arrive in Boston. The streets make absolutely no sense. They twist, turn, dead end, and change names for no apparent reason. Try to navigate on a grid system like most American cities and you'll lose your mind. But there's a beautiful reason for this chaos. Boston's streets weren't planned. They evolved organically over nearly 400 years, following old cow paths, property lines, and the natural geography of a city built on a peninsula. This is exactly how European cities developed. London, Paris, Rome, they all have the same winding, confusing street patterns because they grew slowly over centuries instead of being laid out on a drawing board. Walk through the North End, Boston's oldest neighborhood, and you're stepping onto streets that were laid out in the 1630s. These narrow lanes were never meant for cars because cars wouldn't be invented for another 250 years. The buildings lean close together, blocking out the sky. In summer, residents stretch laundry lines between buildings across the street, just like you'd see in Naples or Barcelona. Beacon Hill takes this European feel even further. Gas lamps still light the sidewalks at night, just like they have since the 1800s. The brick townhouses with their black shutters and flower boxes could be lifted straight from London's Mayfair district. In autumn, when leaves cover the cobblestones and fog rolls in from the harbor, you'd swear you were walking through an English novel. The city has fought hard to preserve this character. There are strict rules about what you can and can't change on historic buildings. No giant parking lots cutting through neighborhoods. No wide boulevards bulldozed through old districts. Boston decided long ago that its European character was worth protecting, even if it means dealing with narrow streets and limited parking. Here's something that separates Boston from almost every other American city. You don't need a car. In fact, having a car in Boston is often more trouble than it's worth. This is fundamentally European thinking in a country built around the automobile. Boston is one of the most walkable cities in America. The downtown area, Back Bay, Beacon Hill, the North End, the South End, and Cambridge are all connected by sidewalks, paths, and bridges that make walking not just possible but actually enjoyable. People walk to work, walk to restaurants, walk to the grocery store. This is normal behavior in London or Paris, but it's rare in American cities outside of maybe New York and San Francisco. The Boston subway system is the oldest in America, opening in 1897. Riding the Green Line through underground tunnels and then up to street level on old tracks feels more like riding the London Tube or Paris Metro than any American transit system. The stations have personality, quirks, and history. Some still have the original tilework from over a century ago. But it's not just about having public transportation. It's about the culture around it. In Boston, you'll see business people in suits riding the subway next to students next to construction workers. There's no stigma attached to public transit like there is in many American cities. This is European thinking, where public space is genuinely public and shared by everyone. The neighborhoods are designed at human scale. Buildings are generally 3 to 5 stories, not towering skyscrapers that make you feel small. Shops and cafes occupy ground floors, putting activity at eye level. You can walk an entire neighborhood and actually see what's around you, notice details, run into people you know. This creates community in a way that car-dependent suburbs never can. The Charles River Esplanade gives you miles of walking and biking paths along the water, connecting neighborhoods and providing green space right in the heart of the city. On any given day, you'll see runners, cyclists, people having picnics, sailboats on the river. It's urban life that doesn't sacrifice access to nature, another very European concept. Americans often say we don't have history like Europe does. Then you come to Boston and realize that's not quite true. Boston has been continuously inhabited since 1630. That's nearly 400 years of accumulated history, stories, and ghosts walking the streets. The Freedom Trail literally draws a red line through history. This 2.5-mile walking path connects 16 historical sites, from the Boston Common to the Bunker Hill Monument. You can walk from the oldest public park in America to the church where lanterns signaled Paul Revere to the cemetery where Revolutionary heroes are buried. Every step is walking through the birth of America. But here's what makes Boston feel European. The city hasn't turned its history into a museum. People actually live and work in these historic buildings. The old State House, built in 1713, sits surrounded by modern skyscrapers, but it's still there, still standing, refusing to be erased by progress. In most American cities, that building would have been demolished decades ago to make room for a parking garage. Faneuil Hall has been a marketplace and meeting hall since 1742. Today, it's still a marketplace. You can buy food, eat at restaurants, watch street performers, all in a building where Samuel Adams once gave speeches that helped spark a revolution. The building has evolved with the times while maintaining its essential character. This is how European cities treat their history, as something living and useful, not just something to preserve behind glass. The churches in Boston tell their own story. The Old North Church, built in 1723, still holds services every Sunday. The architecture is classic New England, which itself was heavily influenced by English church design. Boston's cemeteries are nothing like the sprawling lawn cemeteries common in most of America. The Granary Burying Ground, established in 1660, has tilted headstones crowded together, old trees growing between graves, and that particular atmosphere of age that you find in European graveyards. Paul Revere, Samuel Adams, and John Hancock are all buried here, along with thousands of regular Bostonians whose stories are lost to time. The city's relationship with its past shapes everything. New construction has to consider historical context. Preservation societies have real power. This creates a city where past and present exist side by side, constantly in conversation with each other. It's a very old-world approach to urban development. Boston isn't one unified city. It's a collection of distinct neighborhoods, each with its own identity, character, and history. This neighborhood-based culture is intensely European and sets Boston apart from many American cities. The North End is Boston's Little Italy, and it's the real deal. This isn't some touristy recreation of Italian culture. Italian immigrants settled here in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and their descendants still live here. The bakeries have been run by the same families for generations. The restaurants serve food based on recipes brought from Italy a century ago. During the summer, religious festivals fill the streets with processions, music, and food vendors, just like you'd see in small Italian towns. Walking through the North End feels like walking through Rome or Palermo. The buildings are packed tight together. Beacon Hill is Boston's most photogenic neighborhood, and it's absurdly European. The streets are so narrow that cars can barely fit. The brick townhouses with their purple-tinted windows, a manufacturing defect in old glass that's now treasured, and iron railings could be in London's poshest districts. Acorn Street, often called the most photographed street in America, is cobblestoned and so steep and narrow it feels like it belongs in a medieval European city. The South End shows a different side of Boston's European character. This neighborhood was developed in the mid-1800s and designed to rival London's fashionable squares. You'll find the largest concentration of Victorian brownstone buildings in America here. The squares are modeled directly on London residential squares, with private parks surrounded by elegant townhouses. Today, the South End is one of Boston's most diverse and vibrant neighborhoods, blending its Victorian architecture with modern art galleries, restaurants, and culture. Cambridge, across the river, deserves its own discussion. Yes, it's technically a separate city, but it's so connected to Boston that they function as one. Cambridge is home to Harvard and MIT, and the intellectual culture here is palpable. The bookstores, cafes filled with people reading and arguing about ideas, the lectures open to the public, the sense that education and intellectual pursuit are valued above almost everything else, this is very European. Universities in Europe have shaped their cities for centuries, and the same is true in Cambridge. Each Boston neighborhood has corner stores, local restaurants, neighborhood bars where regulars gather. This local business culture creates communities where people know each other, where the baker remembers how you like your coffee, where you run into neighbors while picking up groceries. It's old world community in a modern city. Boston's food scene tells the story of its European roots better than almost anything else. This is a city where food traditions go back generations and where European influence is undeniable. The cafe culture in Boston is surprisingly European. Sure, you have your Starbucks on every corner like anywhere else in America, but you also have small, independent cafes where people actually sit, read, talk, and linger. Café Vittoria in the North End has been serving espresso since 1929, and walking in feels like stepping into a cafe in Rome. The coffee is strong, the pastries are authentic, and nobody rushes you to leave. Boston's seafood culture goes back to the city's founding as a fishing port. Cod was so important to Boston's economy that a wooden carving of a cod hangs in the State House. The fish markets in Boston, like the ones near the waterfront, have that same energy and character you find in European fish markets, with vendors shouting, fresh catches displayed on ice, and the smell of the sea everywhere. The pub culture here is distinctly Irish-influenced but also connects to broader European traditions. Boston received massive Irish immigration in the 1800s, and that culture took deep root. But the pubs here aren't just about drinking. They're community gathering places, where regulars know each other, where live music happens, where political discussions unfold. This is the European pub tradition transplanted to American soil. Fine dining in Boston has always looked to Europe. The restaurants that defined Boston's high-end food scene in the 20th century were French-influenced. Today's top restaurants still draw heavily on European techniques and traditions, even as they incorporate global influences. The idea that dining is an experience, not just fuel, that meals should be savored and shared, these are fundamentally European values that Boston embraced early and maintains. Farmers' markets in Boston connect to European traditions of local, seasonal food. The Boston Public Market, open year-round, features only food produced within 400 miles. This focus on regional food, on knowing where your food comes from, on the relationship between city and countryside, is very European. In many American cities, farmers' markets are trendy additions. In Boston, they feel like extensions of traditions that never fully went away. Here's something that makes Boston fundamentally different from most American cities. Education isn't just an industry here. It's part of the culture, woven into the identity of the city itself. This is a very European concept. Boston and Cambridge host over 50 colleges and universities. Harvard, founded in 1636, is the oldest institution of higher education in America. MIT is one of the world's leading research universities. Boston University, Northeastern, Tufts, and dozens more fill the city with students, professors, researchers, and the energy that comes with all that intellectual activity. But it's not just about having universities. It's about how the universities interact with the city. In Europe, universities have shaped their cities for centuries. The University of Bologna, founded in 1088, has defined that Italian city for nearly a millennium. Oxford and Cambridge in England are synonymous with their universities. Paris is unimaginable without the Sorbonne. Boston works the same way. The universities aren't isolated campuses separated from city life. Harvard Square is a genuine public square where students, residents, tourists, and street performers all mix together. You can walk into Harvard Yard, the historic heart of the university, anytime you want. Many university buildings are integrated into city neighborhoods. Bookstores are everywhere. The independent bookstore scene in Boston is stronger than in most American cities. Harvard Bookstore, Trident Booksellers, Brookline Booksmith, these aren't just stores, they're community institutions that host author events, discussions, and serve as gathering places for people who care about ideas. The lecture culture here mirrors European cities. Many are free or cheap. The idea that the public should have access to cutting-edge thinking, that universities have a responsibility to the broader community, this is very European. Libraries in Boston are taken seriously. The Boston Public Library, founded in 1848, was the first large free municipal library in the United States. The building itself is a Renaissance Revival palace that could sit comfortably in any European capital. The reading rooms are quiet sanctuaries filled with people actually reading, studying, thinking. The city showcases nearly 400 years of building styles, from colonial to contemporary, often standing side by side. This layering of architectural history is quintessentially European. The oldest buildings in Boston are wood frame houses from the 1600s and early 1700s. The Paul Revere House, built around 1680, is the oldest remaining structure in downtown Boston. It's a medieval-style house that wouldn't look out of place in an English village from the same period. Georgian architecture dominates many of Boston's 18th-century buildings. This style, brought from England, emphasizes symmetry, proportion, and classical details. When Americans were still British colonists, they built in British styles, and those buildings remain. Federal-style architecture, popular in the early American Republic, fills Beacon Hill and other neighborhoods. This is the architecture of Charles Bulfinch, Boston's first professional architect, who designed the Massachusetts State House with its famous gold dome. Victorian architecture exploded in Boston during the 19th century. The South End's brownstones, Back Bay's grand townhouses, these showcase the ornate, decorative style that dominated both America and Europe in the Victorian era. The city's churches represent their own architectural history. From simple colonial meeting houses to high Victorian Gothic to modern contemporary designs, Boston's religious buildings show evolving ideas about sacred space, community, and the relationship between architecture and faith. What makes Boston special is that these different architectural periods haven't been erased as the city modernized. Yes, there are modern skyscrapers downtown. The Prudential Tower and John Hancock Tower define Boston's skyline. But they exist alongside and in conversation with historic buildings. The city has height restrictions in historic districts. This creates a city where you can see your history just by walking around. The preservation ethic in Boston is strong. Unlike many American cities that demolished historic buildings for urban renewal or parking lots, Boston has fought to save its architectural heritage. But Boston has generally come down on the side of preservation, recognizing that once these buildings are gone, they're gone forever. This approach to architecture and urban planning is fundamentally European. European cities are palimpsests, layers of history visible everywhere you look. A building from 1650 stands next to one from 1850 next to one from 1950. Boston has embraced this same approach, creating an American city that feels like it has European depth and complexity. So why does Boston feel like Europe planted in America? It's not any single thing. It's the combination of walkable neighborhoods, preserved historic architecture, distinct community cultures, public transportation that works, narrow winding streets, serious food traditions, university culture that values ideas and education, and a preservation ethic that respects the past while moving into the future. Boston proves that American cities don't have to be built around cars and parking lots. They can be human-scaled, walkable, and community-focused. Boston shows that preserving history doesn't mean becoming a museum. Old buildings can house new businesses, historic neighborhoods can be vibrant and alive, the past and present can coexist productively. Is Boston perfect? Of course not. The cost of living is high. The weather ranges from brutally cold winters to uncomfortably humid summers. The old infrastructure that gives the city character also means things break down. The narrow streets that feel charming when you're walking feel infuriating when you're driving. Like any city, Boston has problems with inequality, gentrification, and the challenges of balancing preservation with growth. But Boston remains unique among American cities. It offers something different, a glimpse of how cities can be when they're built at human scale, when they value history and community, when they resist the pressure to demolish the old and replace it with the new. If you've never been to Boston, add it to your list. Walk the Freedom Trail, get lost in the North End, grab a cannoli, ride the T, explore Harvard Square, walk along the Charles River, sit in a cafe and just watch the city go by. You'll understand why people say Boston is America's most European city. And if you found this exploration of Boston interesting, hit that like button right now. Share this video with anyone who loves cities, history, architecture, or travel. Subscribe to Worldview TV and turn on notifications so you never miss our journeys exploring countries, cities, and cultures around the world. Drop a comment and tell me, have you been to Boston? Does it live up to the European comparison? Or is there another American city you think deserves that title? I read every comment and I love hearing your perspectives. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and remember that the best way to understand the world is to actually see it. Thanks for joining Worldview TV on this journey through Boston.